The late afternoon sun was blazing down on the city plaza, heating the stone ground until it felt like an oven. It was one of those hot days where the air seems to shimmer above the pavement. The city was alive with the sound of cars honking in the distance and people rushing to get where they needed to go. But in the middle of all this noise, right outside a fancy cafe with a bright green awning, things seemed to move a little slower. This was a place where people went to see and be seen. The tables were small and round, made of cold metal, and the chairs were packed so close together that you couldn't help but listen to the conversation. Next to you at one of these prime tables, right near the edge of the patio where the foot traffic was heaviest, sat three friends. They were young, probably in their early 20s, and they had the look of people who hadn't ever really had to struggle for much. They were dressed in trendy clothes that looked clean and crisp, even in the heat. There was a guy in the middle. Let's call him the leader of the group, who was leaning back with his legs stretched out, taking up as much space as he could. On his left sat a girl who was checking her reflection in a small pocket mirror. And on his right was another guy who was typing furiously on his phone. They were loud, but not in an angry way. It was the loud laughter of people having a good time, the kind of noise that makes you turn your head because they seem so happy. They were joking about a video they had just watched, making fun of the people in it. It was easy, careless fun. They had ordered expensive iced coffees with whipped cream on top. The condensation was dripping down the sides of their plastic cups, pooling on the metal table. They were in their own little bubble. In this bubble, there was no heat, there were no problems, and there was certainly no hunger. It was a perfect moment of relaxation for them after a long week of work or classes, while they laughed. The world moved around them. Waiters in white aprons zoomed back and forth, carrying trays loaded with sandwiches and pastries. A street musician playing a guitar on the corner was strumming a song that nobody was really listening to. Tourists walked by with cameras hanging around their necks, looking up at the tall buildings. And then, moving very slowly against this fast current of people, came an old man. He didn't fit into the picture of the fancy cafe at all. He was small and thin, bent over slightly as if he was carrying a heavy weight on his shoulders, even though his hands were empty. His skin was deeply tanned and rough, like old leather that had been left out in the sun too long. It was etched with deep lines that told the story of a hard life. He wore a heavy-looking coat despite the heat that was dusty and frayed at the edges. His pants were too big for him and held up by a piece of string. On his feet, he wore shoes that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles, held together by tape and hope. He moved with a shuffling step, lifting his feet just high enough to clear the ground. He didn't look at the tall buildings or the expensive shops. His eyes were mostly focused on the ground, scanning the pavement as if looking for something he had lost. Or perhaps just watching his own feet to make sure he didn't trip. In one hand, he held a small white paper cup. It was the kind of cup you might get water in at a public fountain, not the kind you use for coffee. It was crumpled slightly at the rim. Inside the cup, there were a few coins, 2 pennies, and a dime that rattled softly every time. He took a step. The old man walked past the first few tables of the cafe. The people sitting there didn't even look up. They were busy talking or eating, effectively ignoring him. It was as if he was invisible, a ghost walking through a crowd of living people. But the old man was used to this. He kept his head down and kept moving. He wasn't begging aggressively. He wasn't shouting or holding up a sign. He was just existing, drifting through the crowd, waiting for someone to notice him. Eventually, his path brought him closer to the table where the three friends were sitting. The noise of their laughter was louder than the rest of the cafe. It was a sharp contrast to the silence the man carried with him. He stopped near the edge of their table, just a few feet away from the guy who was leaning back with his legs stretched out. He stood there quietly for a moment, waiting for a break in their conversation. The girl with the mirror noticed him first. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't say anything, just gave a little nudge to the guy in the middle. He stopped laughing and turned his head to see what she was looking at. When his eyes landed on the old man, his expression changed instantly. The smile slid off his face, replaced by a look of annoyance. It was the look you give someone who has interrupted something important. The old man seemed to sense the shift in mood. He gripped his paper cup a little tighter. He didn't look them in the eye right away. He looked at the half-eaten sandwich on the table, and then at the expensive shoes of the guy in the middle, he cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound that was hard to hear over the noise of the street. "Excuse me," the old man said. His voice was quiet, like wind blowing through dry grass. The guy in the middle let out a long, exaggerated sigh. He looked at his friends and rolled his eyes, a clear signal that this interruption was ridiculous. He turned back to the old man, leaning forward slightly. "We're kind of in the middle of something here, pal," the guy said. His voice wasn't shouting, but it was sharp enough to cut. "If you're looking for a handout, we already gave at the office, you know?" His two friends chuckled at this. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the laugh of people who feel superior, who find it funny that someone else has to ask for money while they have plenty to spend on iced coffee. The girl put her mirror away and picked up her coffee, taking a sip while looking at the old man with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. Like he was a strange specimen in a zoo, the old man didn't move away. He stood his ground, though he shrank back a little, as if physically trying to make himself take up less space. He looked at the coins in his cup and then looked back at the young man. "I don't want money," the old man said softly. The guy with the phone stopped typing and looked up, surprised. The guy in the middle laughed, throwing his head back. "Oh, come on," he said, leaning back and spreading his arms out. "You don't want money? Then what do you want?" "Autographs. Selfies." His friends laughed harder this time. A few people at the nearby tables looked over to see what was so funny, but they quickly went back to their own business when they saw it was just a homeless guy being bothered. The plaza was a cruel place sometimes. People got used to seeing hard things and stopped caring. The old man ignored the mockery. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling under the heavy coat. He seemed to be gathering all his courage for whatever he was about to say next. He finally lifted his head and looked the young man in the eye. His eyes were surprisingly clear. They weren't glazed over or confused. They were sharp and intense, filled with a kind of sadness that made you look twice. I want to sing," the old man said. "Just one song?" For you, the silence that fell over the table was instant. It was like someone had hit the mute button. The three friends looked at each other, completely confused. They had expected him to ask for change, or maybe for a bite of their food. They were ready to say no to that. But a request to sing? That was something they had never heard before. The guy in the middle blinked, his mouth slightly open. He looked at the old man, then at his friends, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. "Sing?" the guy asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You want to sing here?" The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, just one song. If you don't like it, I go? I promise." For a second, nobody said anything. The heat of the afternoon seemed to press down on them. Then, the guy in the middle started to smile. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a cruel, mocking smile that spread across his face as he realized the entertainment value of the situation. He looked at his friends and saw they were amused too. This was better than a video on a phone. This was live comedy right in front of them. "You want to sing for us?" the guy asked again, laughing. "Okay, sure. Why not?" "Go ahead, Elvis. Let's see what you got." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, ready to be amused. The girl and the other friend pulled their chairs in a little closer, their eyes fixed on the old man with eager looks of anticipation. They were expecting something terrible. They were expecting a cracked voice and silly lyrics, something they could film and laugh about later. They saw him as a clown, not a human being. The old man didn't seem to notice their cruel smiles. He just nodded gratefully, as if they had given him a great gift. He reached a trembling hand into the deep pocket of his old coat, searching for something. The three friends leaned in, their grins wide, waiting for the show to begin. The sun beat down on the metal table, the ice in their coffee melting into watery puddles. Completely forgotten, as the focus of the plaza shifted to this small, dusty man and his strange, simple request. The old man's hand disappeared deep into the heavy pocket of his coat. He moved slowly, searching through the layers of fabric and whatever else he carried with him. The three friends at the table watched him with grins plastered on their faces. To them, this was the perfect end to a boring afternoon. They had expected him to beg for $1, maybe to give a sob story about needing bus fare. But this was entertainment. It was like a live show they hadn't paid for. The guy in the middle, the one who had been leaning back with such arrogance, sat up straighter. He nudged the girl sitting next to him and whispered something that made her giggle behind her hand. The tension was gone, replaced by a cruel excitement. They were ready to mock whatever came out of this man's mouth. They were already thinking of the jokes they would make later about the concert they were getting. Finally, the old man pulled his hand out. He wasn't holding a microphone or a speaker, obviously. He held two small objects in his palm. The first was a harmonica. It was made of metal, but it looked ancient. The gold paint had chipped away in most places, leaving behind patches of dull silver and rusty brass. It was tiny, fitting easily in the center of his wrinkled hand. The second object was even stranger. It was a stone. It wasn't a special gem or anything shiny. It was just a smooth, gray river rock, about the size of a large egg. It looked like something you would skip across a lake, not something you would bring to a performance. The friends looked at the items and then back at the man. The laughter died down for just a second, replaced by confusion. Seriously, the guy on the right asked, breaking the silence. He held his phone up. The camera lens pointed directly at the old man's face. "That's your instrument? A rock and a rusty mouth organ?" The old man didn't get defensive. He didn't seem offended by their tone. He simply held up the harmonica and rubbed it gently on his sleeve, wiping away a smudge of dirt. Then he placed the smooth river stone down on the metal table right in the center of their drinks. It made a soft clink sound against the tabletop. "This is my drum," the old man said quietly. His voice was still raspy, but there was a hint of pride in it. "And this," he said, lifting the harmonica, "is my voice." The table erupted into laughter again. It was louder this time, more raucous. The guy in the middle slapped his knee, delighted by the absurdity of it all. The idea that a dirty rock could be a drum was hilarious to them. They couldn't wait to share this video online with the caption "Street Performance of the Year." "A rock," the guy in the middle repeated, shaking his head. Okay. I like the creativity. Don't you guys love the creativity?" He looked at his friends, who were nodding and chuckling. "All right, Grandpa. Let's hear it. Make us proud." The girl leaned forward, her chin resting in her hand, her eyes dancing with anticipation of a train wreck. "Come on," she teased. "Give us a hit. Something with a beat." The old man stood there for a moment, ignoring their laughter. He looked down at the stone on the table. His face was serious, devoid of any humor. He closed his eyes for a brief second, taking a deep breath that seemed to fill his entire chest. He wasn't preparing to be the butt of their joke. He was preparing to do something that mattered to him. It was strange to see someone look so focused and dignified. In such a ridiculous situation, the camera on the phone kept recording, capturing the dust on the man's coat, the way his hands shook slightly, and the way the three friends smirked at him like wolves circling a tired animal. The sounds of the plaza, the chatter of other tables, the music from the store next door seemed to fade into the background for this small group. They were in their own world now. The old man opened his eyes. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't look at the laughing friends. He fixed his gaze on a spot in the distance, perhaps remembering something from a long time ago. He lifted the harmonica to his lips. The metal touched his chapped skin, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, he blew into the small instrument. The sound that came out wasn't the squeaky amateur noise they were expecting. It wasn't a random puff of air. It was a rich, deep note that seemed to vibrate right through the metal table and into the bones of the people sitting there. It was a soulful blues sound, the kind of sound that belongs in a smoky jazz club late at night. Not on a sunny sidewalk in the middle of the day. The friends' smirks froze. The guy holding the phone didn't lower it, but his hand stopped moving. The girl sat up a little straighter, her laughter cutting off abruptly. The sound was too real, too good to be a joke. The old man followed that first deep note with a melody. It was sad but beautiful. He played with a skill that took decades to master. His fingers, which had looked so shaky when he was holding the cup, were now steady as he tapped the harmonica, changing the airflow to create a wailing, crying tone. It sounded like a heartbreak. After playing a few bars of the melody alone, he reached out with his other hand. He picked up the smooth river stone. He held it like a drumstick, but there was no aggression in his grip. He brought the stone down onto the metal table. Tap, 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 tap. It was a soft sound, surprisingly rhythmic. The stone hitting the metal made a high-pitched ping. But the way the old man controlled it made it sound like a percussion instrument. He didn't bang on the table like a child. He caressed the metal with the stone, creating a heartbeat that ran underneath the wail of the harmonica. He started to play the two together. The harmonica sang a song of loss, and the stone kept time like a steady pulse. It was mesmerizing. The guy in the middle, who had been so ready to mock, found himself leaning in without realizing it, his arms uncrossed. The casual look of superiority was wiped away, replaced by a look of confusion and growing respect. The old man began to sway slightly as he played. He was lost in the music. For these few minutes, he wasn't a beggar asking for scraps. He was a musician, an artist. The heavy coat and the dirty shoes didn't matter anymore. The music was coming from somewhere deep inside, a place that the three friends, with all their money and their trendy clothes, knew nothing about. People at the neighboring tables began to notice. A couple who had been arguing over a bill stopped and turned around. A waiter carrying a tray paused for a second, listening. The magic of the music was pulling them in. It was raw and unpolished, but it had more emotion than anything played on the radio. The friends sat in stunned silence. The girl wasn't giggling anymore. She was watching the old man's hands, fascinated by the coordination between the harmonica and the stone. The guy on the right slowly lowered his phone. He didn't care about recording a funny video anymore. He just wanted to listen. It felt disrespectful to hold a camera up when the man was playing with such soul. The song went on. It didn't have words, yet it told a story. It told of walking a long way alone. It told of missing people you can't see anymore. It told of being tired but keeping going. The rhythm of the stone against the table was like walking footsteps. Right, left, right. The harmonica was the wind blowing against the traveler's back. Then the old man did something unexpected. He lowered the harmonica from his lips. He kept tapping the stone on the table. Tap, 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 keeping the rhythm alive. He opened his mouth and began to hum. It started as a low hum in his throat, deep and gravelly, matching the tone of the harmonica. Then he started singing. Not shouting, not loud, just singing in a soft, gravelly baritone. I walked a mile. On this lonely road, he sang, the English was simple, but the feeling behind it was heavy. The words were clear, cutting through the noise of the street. Heavy load. Heavy load. Got nowhere to lay my head. The guy in the middle felt a strange tightness in his chest. He looked at his friends. They were all looking at the old man now, completely still. The irony hit him hard. Here they were, laughing at this man, treating him like he was nothing. And yet, here he was, pouring out more beauty and honesty in 2 minutes than they probably had in their entire day. The rock, the thing they laughed at, was now keeping the time for a song that was making the hair on their arms stand up. The old man closed his eyes again as he sang the next line. He didn't care about the money in their pockets anymore. He wasn't performing for them. He was performing for the music itself. The stone hit the table one last time, a sharp, decisive sound, and then the old man let the rhythm fade away. The tapping got softer and slower until it stopped completely. The harmonica gave one last, high-pitched sigh, and then there was silence. The old man stood still, his hand resting on the table next to the stone. He opened his eyes and looked at the three friends. For a second, nobody moved. The laughter was completely gone. The mocking smiles had vanished. The plaza around them was still noisy, but at that metal table, there was a profound, heavy silence. The air between them had changed completely. The guy holding the phone looked at the screen, then back at the old man, his thumb hovering over the stop button, unsure of what to do. They realized they weren't the judges anymore. They were the students, and the teacher had just given them a lesson they would never forget. The silence that followed the song was heavy. It wasn't just that the noise had stopped. It was that the air around the metal table felt different, charged with something that hadn't been there a few minutes ago. The old man stood there with his head slightly bowed, his hand resting near the smooth river stone. He looked small and tired, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the heavy coat. He seemed to be waiting for a reaction, but he wasn't looking at the friends anymore. He was looking at the ground, perhaps preparing himself for the rejection he was used to. The three friends sat frozen. The guy who had been holding the phone slowly lowered his arm. The screen was still glowing, showing the paused image of the old man's face, but the urge to laugh was completely gone. He looked at his friends, and for the first time that afternoon, they didn't share a secret joke. They shared a look of confusion and sudden embarrassment. The guy in the middle, the one who had been so loud and arrogant earlier, felt a strange tightness in his throat. He cleared his throat loudly, trying to break the tension, trying to find the careless voice he had used before. But it didn't work. The casual cruelty had evaporated the moment the music stopped. He looked at the old man, really looked at him for the first time, not as a prop for a joke, but as a human being. He saw the deep lines on the man's face, the dirt under his fingernails, and the way his hands trembled slightly from fatigue. That was... The girl started to say, but her voice trailed off. She didn't know how to finish the sentence. She wanted to say good or interesting, but those words felt too small, too insulting for what they had just heard. She took a sip of her drink, but the ice had melted, turning the coffee into a watery, cold liquid. She grimaced and put the cup down. Realizing that her expensive drink didn't matter anymore, the old man shifted his weight. He reached out to pick up the river stone, his movements slow and careful. He didn't put it in his pocket right away. He held it in his hand, rubbing the smooth surface with his thumb. It seemed like a comfort object to him, something solid to hold on to in a world that was often harsh. "Thank you for listening," the old man said quietly. He didn't ask for money. He didn't bow or perform for them anymore. He just spoke the words with a simple dignity that made the friends shrink back in their chairs. The guy on the right, the one with the phone, felt a sudden wave of guilt wash over him. He looked at the video he had recorded. He had captured the beginning, the mocking laughter, and the start of the song. But now, looking at the file, he felt sick to his stomach. This wasn't a funny video to post online. This was a recording of a man pouring his heart out, and the guy felt ashamed that he had tried to make a mockery of it. Without a word, he tapped the screen to delete the video. He didn't want any evidence of his own cruelty. The guy in the middle cleared his throat again. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, trying to bridge the gap that he had created between them. "Hey, listen," he said. His voice was softer now, stripped of the fake toughness. "That was actually really good. Mean it. I didn't expect that." The old man looked up, a faint surprised smile touching his lips. "Music is the only thing I have left," he said simply. "It keeps the memories away sometimes." The friends exchanged glances. They realized they knew nothing about this man. They saw a dirty coat and a paper cup, but they didn't see the life he had lived. They didn't know who he was missing or what roads he had walked to get to this plaza. For the first time, they felt the weight of their own privilege. They were sitting here complaining about the heat and the cost of coffee, while this man carried a lifetime of stories on his back. "Sit down for a minute," the girl said suddenly. She pulled out the empty chair opposite her. "Please, just rest your legs." It was an invitation that broke every social rule they usually followed. They didn't invite strangers to sit with them, especially not beggars. But the music had changed the rules. The old man hesitated. He looked around the plaza, unsure. The waiters were watching with curious eyes, but nobody stopped him. Slowly, carefully, the old man sat down. He perched on the edge of the chair, as if he was ready to leave at any second. He didn't lean back. He kept his hands folded in his lap, the stone still clutched in one hand. The guy in the middle signaled to a waiter. When the waiter came over, looking a bit hesitant, the friend pointed to the old man. "Can we get him a coffee? And maybe some food? Something warm." "Whatever the chef recommends." The waiter nodded, a bit surprised, but he hurried away to fill the order. The silence at the table was no longer awkward. It was respectful. The friends found themselves looking at the old man with curiosity instead of judgment. "Do you play around here often?" the girl asked. She leaned in, genuinely interested. "I move around," the old man said. "I go where the people are. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they don't. Today was a good day." He looked at them, and his eyes were warm. "You are kind to listen." The guy with the phone rubbed the back of his neck. "We weren't exactly kind at the start," he muttered. He felt like he needed to apologize, but he didn't have the words. I was being a jerk. I'm sorry." The old man waved his hand dismissively. "Young people laugh. It is the way of the world. You are full of life. It is okay." He didn't hold a grudge. He had seen too much to let a little bit of mockery hurt him. But you heard the song. That is what matters. Soon, the waiter returned. He placed a large mug of steaming black coffee and a plate with a sandwich and a piece of cake in front of the old man. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air between them. The old man stared at the food for a long moment. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the warm ceramic of the mug. He didn't eat immediately. He just closed his eyes and inhaled the scent. It looked like he was memorizing it. "Thank you," he whispered. "Eat up," the guy in the middle said. He pushed the plate closer to the old man. "It's on us." The old man took a sip of the coffee. The hot liquid seemed to wake him up, color returning to his pale cheeks. Then he took a bite of the sandwich. He ate slowly, savoring every chew. The three friends watched him, and for some reason, they didn't feel the need to check their phones or talk about themselves. They were just happy to sit there and provide this small moment of comfort as the old man ate. The sun began to dip lower in the sky. The harsh light of the afternoon softened into a golden glow. The shadows of the buildings stretched out across the plaza. The mood of the city seemed to change as well, shifting from the busy rush of the day to the slower pace of the evening. The old man finished about half of the sandwich and wrapped the rest carefully in a napkin. He slid it into his pocket. He knew he might not get another meal like this tomorrow. "You have a gift," the girl said softly. "Really, my dad plays the guitar, and he says real talent is rare. You have something special." The old man smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I used to play in a band," he said. "A long time ago. We played in big halls. People danced." He looked out at the street, his eyes seeing a different time. But life changes. People go away. The music stays, though. The music never leaves you. Three friends sat in silence, absorbing this. They looked at the dirty coat and the ancient harmonica with new eyes. They realized they had spent the afternoon with a ghost of the past, a man who had once stood on a stage and commanded attention. Just like the singers they listened to on their playlists, the old man picked up his cup and finished the last drop of coffee. He placed the cup gently on the table. He looked at the friends and nodded. "I should go," he said, starting to stand up. "The evening is coming. It is good to find a place to sleep before it gets too dark." The friends didn't want him to leave. They felt like there was so much more they wanted to ask, so much more they wanted to say, but they knew they couldn't fix his life with one sandwich. They couldn't give him back his youth. "Wait," the guy in the middle said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He didn't just pull out a small bill this time. He took out a handful of cash, mostly 20s, and held it out. "Please, take this." The old man looked at the money, then at the guy's face. "I sang for the song," he said. "Not for the money." "I know," the guy said, pushing the money into the old man's hand. "But we want to give it. You. You made us think today. You made us feel something. That's worth more than a sandwich." The old man looked at the cash in his hand. It was more than he had seen in a long time. He didn't put it in the cup with the pennies. He folded it carefully and put it in an inside pocket of his coat, right next to his heart. "You are good kids," the old man said. He picked up his stone and his harmonica. The girl stood up and reached out, gently touching the old man's shoulder. It was a brief contact, a human connection that bridged the gap between their worlds. "Take care of yourself," she said. "And you," the old man replied. He turned and began to shuffle away, moving back into the flow of the pedestrian traffic. The three friends watched him go. He didn't look like a beggar anymore. He walked with a little bit of a spring in his step, his head held a little higher. The friends sat back down at their table. Their drinks were warm now, and the ice was completely melted. The guy in the middle looked at his friends, then at the empty chair where the old man had sat. "That was insane," he whispered. Other guy agreed. He looked down at his phone, scrolling through his social media feed, but he didn't really see it. It all seemed so fake now compared to the raw reality they had just witnessed. He closed the app and put the phone in his pocket. They didn't laugh anymore. They didn't make jokes. They just sat there, watching the sun go down, listening to the sounds of the city, thinking about the man who turned a simple request into a moment that changed their perspective forever. The rock, the harmonica, and the song had done what words could never do. They had broken through the armor of their cynicism and touched a part of them that they didn't know existed. And as they finally got up to leave, realized they weren't the same people who had sat down at that table a few hours ago. The three friends stayed at the table for a long time after the old man walked away. The sun had dipped below the tall buildings now, and the plaza was filling with the blue shadows of the early evening. The metal tables around them were emptying out as people finished their coffees and headed home for the day. But the three young friends didn't move. They felt glued to their chairs, as if getting up would break the spell that the old man's song had cast over them. The guy in the middle, who had been the loud one earlier, was tapping his fingers on the table. He wasn't tapping out a rhythm of impatience anymore. He was trying to replicate the soft beat the old man had made with the stone. He looked at his fingers, then at the spot on the table where the river stone had sat. It was clean now. No smudge of dirt, just a faint circle where the moisture had evaporated. "I can't get that tune out of my head," he said softly. He looked up at his friends. His face looked different without the smirk he had worn all day. He looked younger and strangely more tired. It was so sad, but I don't know. It felt peaceful too. The girl nodded slowly. She was holding the cold cup of melted ice, turning it around in her hands. "It makes you feel stupid, doesn't it?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Here we are worrying about what clothes we bought or how many likes our pictures get. And that guy, he's just trying to survive. But he has this whole world inside him." The guy on the right, who had tried to film the encounter, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He looked down at his phone, which was lying face down on the table. He felt a knot of guilt in his stomach that wouldn't go away. He had treated a human soul like a piece of content. "I almost posted him," he admitted, his voice cracking a little. "I almost turned his pain into a joke for the internet." "You didn't, though?" the girl said, reaching over and patting his arm. "You stopped. That's what matters." The guy let out a long breath and leaned back, looking up at the darkening sky. "Yeah, but it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other times have I walked right past someone like him and didn't even see it?" The conversation fell into a comfortable silence. It wasn't the bored, restless silence from before. It was a thoughtful silence. They were watching the people walking by on the sidewalk. Before, they had looked at the crowd as just background noise, a blur of faces blocking their view. Now, they found themselves looking at each person individually. They saw a tired mother pulling a wagon with a crying child. They saw a businessman in a suit yelling into his phone, looking stressed and angry. They saw a young kid sitting on a bench waiting for someone. "Do you think he really played in big halls?" the guy in the middle asked. Or was he just saying that? The girl thought about it for a moment. She remembered the way his hands held the harmonica, the way he moved the stone with such precise timing. You couldn't fake that kind of muscle memory. You couldn't fake that kind of soul. "Think he did," she said. "Did you see his face when he talked about it?" For a second, he wasn't an old man in a dirty coat. He was a star again. He sat there for another 20 minutes, just watching the world go by. The waiter came by and cleared their empty cups, giving them a polite smile. He didn't rush them. Even he sensed that the mood at this table was different. The energy of the group had changed from chaotic to grounded. Eventually, the guy on the right picked up his phone. He opened the music app. I'm going to try to find that song, he said, the one he was humming. I walked a mile on this lonely road. It probably doesn't have a name, the girl said. It sounded like something he made up. Or maybe it's a really old folk song that people forgot. Does it matter? The guy in the middle asked. It's his song now. That's enough. He stood up and stretched, his arms reaching high above his head. He realized that his shoulders, which had been tight with stress all week, felt loose. The heavy, cynical feeling he carried around like a backpack had lightened. It was strange to think that a 5-minute conversation with a stranger could do that more effectively than a vacation or a party ever could. We should probably head back, he said. It's getting late. The others nodded and stood up. They gathered their things, phones, wallets, sunglasses. As they walked away from the table, the guy in the middle stopped. He looked at the empty chair where the old man had sat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill. He didn't know why, but he felt like he wanted to leave something there, like an offering to the memory of the moment. He placed it on the table right under the menu. Come on, the girl called out to him gently. He turned and joined them. They walked out of the plaza and onto the main street. The city was louder here, filled with the rush hour traffic. Cars honked and buses roared by. Usually this sound annoyed them, but today they didn't mind it. It just sounded like life happening. As they walked, they passed a few other people asking for change. A woman sitting on a blanket with a small dog. A man holding a cardboard sign near the subway station. In the past, they would have crossed to the other side of the street or stared at their phones to avoid eye contact. But today, they didn't. The guy in the middle stopped in front of the man with the cardboard sign. He didn't have much cash left. He had given most of it to the old man, but he dug into his pocket and found a few crumpled dollar bills. He didn't just drop them into the man's cup. He stopped and looked the man in the eye. Hi there, the young man said. How are you doing tonight? The man on the ground looked up, surprised by the greeting. He was used to people throwing coins without even looking at him. Hanging in there, the man mumbled. Thank you. Stay warm, the young man said. He smiled, a real smile, and put the money in the cup. He caught up with his friends, who were waiting a few feet away. They didn't tease him for being soft. They just smiled at him. They continued walking toward the subway station. The air was getting cooler, a breeze picking up and blowing the litter along the gutters. They talked about their plans for the weekend, but the conversation was different. It wasn't about showing off. They talked about maybe going to a music store to look at harmonicas. They talked about volunteering. Wonder if we'll see him again, the girl said, as they descended the stairs into the subway station. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the smell of ozone and stale air filled their noses. The old guy? The guy with the phone asked. Maybe. The city isn't that big. If we do, she said, we shouldn't just give him money. We should ask him to play again. And this time, we should actually listen. Like really listen without any phones. Deal, the guy in the middle said. A train pulled into the station, screeching against the tracks. The doors slid open with a chime. They stepped inside, finding a spot to stand near the door. The car was crowded with people looking exhausted after their workday. Everyone was staring at their screens or into space. The three friends held onto the metal poles. The train started moving, swaying side to side. The guy in the middle closed his eyes for a second. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he could hear the song again. He could see the old man's weathered hands tapping the stone on the table. He realized that he had received a gift today. It wasn't the music itself, although that was beautiful. The gift was the shift in his own heart. He looked at his friends. They looked back at him. They didn't need to say anything. They all knew that something had changed. They weren't just three friends hanging out. They were witnesses to a moment of grace. They had seen through the dirty surface of things and found the gold underneath. When the train stopped at their station, they got out and walked toward the exit. The night was dark now, lit up by the streetlights and the headlights of the cars. They walked out of the subway and headed their separate ways. See you tomorrow, the girl said, waving. Night, the guys replied. As the guy in the middle walked the final few blocks to his apartment, he passed a park. He could hear music drifting from the gazebos, some high school kids playing acoustic guitars. He stopped and listened for a minute. It wasn't the blues. It was fast and energetic. But he listened to the rhythm, really listening, hearing the effort and the joy in it. He smiled to himself and kept walking. He climbed the stairs to his building and unlocked the front door. Inside, it was quiet. He kicked off his shoes and dropped his keys on the table. He walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline. The lights were twinkling, millions of lives happening all at once. He thought about the old man finding a place to sleep, maybe wrapping himself tighter in that heavy coat. He hoped the man had a safe night. He hoped he had good dreams. The young man went to his shelf and pulled out an old notebook. He opened it to a blank page. He picked up a pen and started to write. He wasn't writing a story or a poem. He was just writing down the way he felt today. I learned that everyone carries a song, he wrote. Asterisk, even if they look like they have nothing left. He closed the notebook and turned off the light. The room was dark, but his mind was bright. He lay down on his pillow, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't scroll through his phone before sleeping. He just closed his eyes and listened to the silence, letting the memory of the simple, heartfelt melody wash over him like a gentle wave. It was the best sleep he had had in years. And somewhere out there in the vast, sleeping city, the old man was dreaming too. Perhaps of the days when the whole world clapped for him, knowing that for one afternoon he had made them listen again. A few days later, the weather in the city changed. The bright, hot sun was replaced by a thick, gray covering of clouds that hung low over the rooftops. The air felt heavy and cool, warning everyone that the seasons were turning. It was the kind of Saturday where people stayed indoors, bundling up in blankets or sitting in warm cafes to avoid the chill. But the three friends were out again. They hadn't made a strict plan to meet at the same plaza, but they all found themselves drawn back there. It was like gravity was pulling them to the spot where their perspective had shifted. They arrived at different times, but ended up at the same metal table outside the green awning cafe. They were dressed warmer today, wearing jackets and sweaters. The mood was quieter than the last time they were there. There was no loud bragging, no checking of phones for viral videos. They sat close together, sipping hot teas and coffees, their eyes scanning the flow of people walking by.
Oh.
"Do you think he'll come?" the girl asked, wrapping her hands around her mug for warmth. She looked hopeful, but a little nervous. "I don't know," the guy in the middle replied. He was watching the sidewalk intently. He said he moves around. He might be on the other side of the city by now. "I brought something," the third friend said quietly. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small drawstring bag. "I went to that music shop on 4th Street. The one with all the vintage stuff in the window." He loosened the string of the bag and tilted it so the others could see. Inside, resting on a bed of soft velvet, was a brand new harmonica. It was shiny, made of polished silver, with a sleek black comb. It looked beautiful and expensive, nothing like the rusty, chipped instrument the old man had played. "Whoa," the girl whispered, leaning in to look. "That's really nice. He's going to love that. I hope so," the friend said, closing the bag again. "I just felt like he gave us something really special that day. Something we didn't even pay for. I wanted to give something back. Something that works, you know?" No rush. They sat and waited. An hour passed, then two. The plaza was busy, despite the gray weather. People rushed by with scarves wrapped around their necks, heads down against the wind. Waiters hustled around with steaming pots of soup and hot chocolate. Every time an elderly person walked past their table, the three friends would perk up, their hearts lifting for a second, only to sink back down when they realized it wasn't him. They were starting to think he wasn't coming. Maybe he had found a better spot. Maybe he had moved on to another town. The guy in the middle checked his watch and sighed. "Maybe we should go." "It's getting colder, wait," the girl said suddenly. She squinted her eyes, looking down the sidewalk near the corner. Is that the two guys turned to look? Walking slowly toward them was a familiar figure. The heavy coat, the dusty pants, the shuffling step. It was him. He looked even more tired than he had the last time. His shoulders were hunched forward against the wind, and his hands were buried deep in his pockets. He looked smaller. Somehow, as if the life was being slowly squeezed out of him by the cold and the hard ground he slept on. The friends sat up straighter. They didn't wave or shout. They just watched him approach. The old man didn't notice them at first. He was walking with his head down, watching his own worn-out shoes hit the pavement. He was just passing through, lost in his own world. It wasn't until he was right beside their table that he paused. He sensed something familiar. He stopped and slowly lifted his head. When his eyes landed on the three friends, a look of surprise crossed his face. He recognized them. He blinked, as if he couldn't believe they were actually there waiting for him. A shy, tentative smile formed on his lips. Well, the old man rasped. The young critics. You are back. We are. The guy in the middle said. He stood up immediately and pulled out the empty chair opposite them. Please, sit down. We were hoping you'd come by. The old man hesitated, looking around the busy plaza. I don't want to bother you again. You have your fun. You're not bothering us, the girl said firmly. Please, just for a minute. Reluctantly, the old man sat down. He perched on the edge of the chair just like last time, keeping his distance. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for food. He just looked at them with curious, kind eyes. We've been talking about you, the guy with the backpack said. About your song? We haven't been able to get it out of our heads. The old man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. It is a catchy tune. My wife. She used to hum it when she cooked. Long time ago. The friends looked at each other. This was the first time he had mentioned a wife. It made the song even more real to them. Listen, the guy in the middle said. We noticed something last time. Your harmonica. It looked like it had seen better days. The old man looked down at his coat pocket. It is old, like me. Some notes don't work anymore. I have to trick them into singing. That's why we got you this, the third friend said. He pushed the small drawstring bag across the table. The old man looked at the bag, then at the friend. He didn't reach for it. What is this? Open it, the girl said, slowly. The old man reached out and untied the string. He peeked inside. His eyes went wide when he saw the silver glinting in the gray light. He reached in and pulled out the new harmonica. It shone in his hand, bright and clean. He turned it over, running his fingers over the smooth metal. He brought it up to his nose and smelled the newness of it. I cannot accept this, he stammered, trying to push it back. This is too expensive. I am just a beggar. No, you're not, the guy in the middle said, his voice strong and serious. You're a musician, and that instrument shouldn't be sitting in a store. It should be in your hands. Please, take it. We want you to have it. The old man looked from the harmonica to their faces. He saw the sincerity in their eyes. He saw that they weren't giving him charity. They were giving him respect. His lower lip trembled just a little. He nodded slowly and pulled the harmonica close to his chest. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you very much. It has been many years since I held something this beautiful. Play something for us, the girl asked softly. Something on the new one? The old man smiled. You want to hear me play? Right here. Yes, all three of them said at once. The old man didn't need to prepare this time. He didn't need to find a stone. He just lifted the new harmonica to his lips. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cool afternoon air. And then he played. The sound was crystal clear. The old harmonica had sounded like a scratchy memory. This one sounded like pure, liquid silver. The notes soared high and dipped low. The melody was different this time. It wasn't the sad blues about the lonely road. It was lighter, hopeful, filled with a sense of gratitude. It was a song for friends. People walking by stopped. The waiter stopped. The music was so pure that it seemed to cut through the gloom of the gray sky. The three friends sat there, grinning from ear to ear. They watched the old man's face light up as he played. For these few minutes, he wasn't a homeless man on the street. He was a master, and this was his concert hall. He played with a joy they hadn't seen before. When he finished the song, he lowered the harmonica and looked at them, his eyes shining. It sounds like angels, he said simply. It sounds like angels. It sounds like you, the girl said. The old man carefully placed the new harmonica in his pocket, patting it to make sure it was safe. He looked at the half-empty coffee cups on the table. "I should go," he said. "I have a place I need to be before dark. But I will play this tonight. I will play it for the stars." He stood up to leave. This time, the friends didn't try to give him money. They didn't need to. They had already given him something that money couldn't buy. They had given him back his dignity and his music. "Will we see you again?" the guy in the middle asked. The old man looked at them, a mysterious smile on his face. "The city is full of roads," he said. "Maybe we meet again. Maybe not. But keep listening. The world is full of songs if you are quiet enough to hear them." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The three friends sat at the table, watching the spot where he vanished. They felt warm inside, despite the cold wind. They looked at each other and smiled, knowing that this simple encounter was a memory they would keep forever. They had laughed at him. Then they had listened to him. And finally, they had understood him. And in understanding him, they had learned a little bit about how to be better people themselves. They picked up their cups, finished their drinks, and stood up to leave, stepping into the rhythm of the city with lighter hearts and open ears.